Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel, To Infinity and Beyond, SEL and Tech, where we'll talk to innovative educators who are using the power of technology to help students learn and practice SEL skills. I'm Stephanie Fiorelli, Director of Alumni Success at the Urban Assembly, and I will be your moderator for today. A quick note about technology. Please ask questions using the Q&A function at the top right. You can ask questions privately, and we'll get to some of them at the end if we have time. Use the chat to introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do, and also throughout the session to engage with us and others. And now a brief introduction to our speakers today. Marcus Blackwell. Marcus is the CEO and founder of Make Music Count, a math curriculum and app taught through playing the piano. Marcus dedicates his energy to developing creative methods that allow students to reach their full educational potential. His company is designed to creatively connect the mathematical dots where traditional methods of teaching fall short. Marcus believes that the key to truly reaching students is through creating culturally relevant methods that speak to everyone's experience. He received a BS in mathematics from Morehouse and has played professional gospel piano since the age of 16. Dr. Susan Rivers is our next guest. Susan is the Executive Director and Chief Scientist of I Thrive Games Foundation. She co-designs with and for youth responsive and immersive environments and experiences that facilitate deep learning about themselves, society, and the world, including 2 award-winning games, The Runaround, a tabletop game examining racial inequities in the juvenile justice system, and I Thrive Sim, a digital role-playing game platform for civics learning and social and emotional skill building. Susan earned her doctorate at Yale, was a lecturer in the psychology department at Skidmore, and served on the research faculty in Yale's Department of Psych, where she was a co-founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. She's founding editor-in-chief of Journal of Games, Self and Society, and the author of numerous scholarly publications and multiple curricula. Dr. Marian Goldstein. Marian is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Vivensity. She's a firm believer that schools must empower students to build skills for life by prioritizing social and emotional learning alongside academics. She draws on extensive expertise in the development, implementation, scale-up, and evaluation of educational innovations. Marian applies the learning sciences through product and program management, co-design, participatory research, and collaborative partnerships to ensure technology is used in ways that empower and unleash teaching and learning opportunities for all. And we have Sean Young with us. Sean is a co-founder and CEO of Classcraft, an innovative platform that motivates students using the culture and mechanics of games. Since its launch, Classcraft has gained incredible traction with educators worldwide, providing tools to transform behavior and classroom cultures. Sean's interested in how we can create community in the classroom and how playful principles can give school meaning. Sean taught 11th grade physics for 9 years, holds a bachelor's degree in physics and master's in education from the University of Sherbrooke, and is also a seasoned web developer. Sean's the co-chair of UNESCO's MGIEP, Global Collective for SEL and Digital Learning, is the president of the EdTech Association, and is an ambassador for the education faculty of University of Sherbrooke. That was a mouthful. Hopefully that will be all you'll really hear of me, because you guys are here for everybody else. Just a note, so we're going to spend the first maybe 20 minutes or so with a few questions that I'll ask everybody. And then I've got a specific question that I'd like Sean and Susan to address later on. And then finally one for Marcus and Marian together. That should bring us to about 2:30, 2:35 when we can take questions from the audience if we're able to. So everybody, first question. What does our theme, not a moment, but a movement, mean to you and your work? Marcus, we're going to start with you and then move to Susan, Marian, and then Sean. And let's say maybe about a minute or so each just to get us going.
Yeah, so first, thank you for having me today. Very excited to be able to share. I think it's kind of self-explanatory, specifically for us, our approach seems very niche and to the point where a lot of people think that this is something that's just here for right now, right? STEAM is here. It's cool. It's the buzzword, but no, this is actually something that is going to change the way that we think about how we educate our youth and talking about the importance of now moving forward with arts integrated concepts into STEM and culturally relevant tactics when teaching younger kids.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Susan?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so pleased to be here as well and excited to learn from each of my co-panelists. For me, how I think about this theme, not a moment, but a movement, has been a movement that's lasted almost my entire professional career. When I got started in this space, SEL wasn't a thing, really. We were talking about social emotional, but CASEL didn't exist. We didn't have programs. It wasn't integrated into schools. And my gosh, how far we've come. And I think even in my own work that I've done and what I'm seeing in the field, that there's innovations and there's so much space for innovation, that we are in this lifelong learning, as I think we all should be, and really thinking about how do we understand social emotional learning and social emotional skill building better, do it better, innovate in this space, because it's not separate from learning and we need to be learning across our lifespan. I really think of social emotional skills as essential skills and cringe when people say things like soft skills, non-cognitive. Yeah. So I use essential. I bring you all into my movement of calling these essential skills. Yes. And it's a set of practices that as kids we need, as adults we need. And so it is a movement, and it has been since the beginning.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. Marion.
Thank you. I mean, we're all familiar with the context, right? That these last few years have been so hard for students and for all the people who care about them. And I mean, it's almost impossible to find a silver lining there. But if nothing else, this period of time has really raised the call, for schools to play an active and a sustained role in supporting students' social and emotional health, along with their academic skills. And I think with this really comes a chance for a paradigm shift, where we as a group and as a country, have a chance to rethink and redefine what school is and what schools have to do, to prepare students for life. And I think there's a lot that has to happen there to make it a movement and not just a moment. But I think there are, some good places to start. I think we can, work together to improve our framing and our communication around SEL so that people understand, what it is and what it's not. I think we really need to work to expand the reach of programs that have been found to work and approaches that work. And I think we need to work actively, in and with communities, to get system-wide support for SEL so that it can become, a long-term, part of everyday life, in school and outside of school.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. And Sean.
Yeah, I would echo, of course, agree with everything everybody said. It's the benefit of being last year. But, it's been a movement for a long time, to Susan's point. It's just an accelerating movement now. It's slowly moving forward before, and now we're, it's kind of snowballing, which I think is a good thing. What gives me hope in terms of the longevity here is... because basically SEL is putting into frameworks and words concepts educators have, been behind for a long time, and now we're just have a way to express it. We have a way to compare, evaluate. We have ways to, be better at it, ways to explain it to parents. But I think, and I don't talk about this a lot because obviously we're working with kids, but in terms of like the longevity, I think the fact that so many adults now are also looking at their own SEL growth and their own, incidentally reading, Atlas of the Heart right now by Brene Brown. And, it's a very, mass popular book, but it's aimed at adults and increasing their SEL literacy as well. And I think that a lot's been said about the needs kids have around this, but I think our educators are going to get a lot better at this. And that's going to really make this much more than just a moment in time. And so I'm pretty hopeful about that. Like, there's us, been kind of helping people get there, cheerleading them on. But, I'm seeing educators more and more at ease and familiar and in love with the ideas. And so I think that that's going to really bring lots of longevity here.
I love that idea of getting the adults involved. SEL isn't my specialty, so I've loved learning from our SEL team and just how it's not just for students, it's for adults as well. And I love all of you guys touched on this idea of we all moving together, right? I think that's the main difference between a movement and a moment. And I wonder if we could just stick with you, Sean. How have you seen technology used to help teach or strengthen, we'll stick with students' SEL skills for now rather than adults. So how have you seen technology used to help teach or strengthen students' SEL skills? Sean, if you could answer, and then we could move sort of down the line to whomever would like to go next.
For sure. I mean, of course, Classcraft, that's the work we're doing. We're using the gaming culture, gaming mechanics to help motivate students around real life practice. Different from iThrive, which is, game-based, and I'm sure Susan will talk about it. We're really saying when it's happening in real life, recognize students being empathetic, having, good self-management skills, good social behaviors, et cetera. And do that in a way that is culturally relevant by using, the culture of games, but also intrinsically motivating by using those mechanics. So obviously, that's a lot of what we've been doing. I think there's massive opportunity. I think games, videos, music, in essence, all the different cultural mediums with which we're interacting today as a species have digital variations or are mainly digital. And so, culture is where we go to connect with ourselves, where we go to connect with others. And so, of course, to even say that, SEL today could be disconnected from technology, I think is a bit of a, I don't want to insult anybody, but, I think that's a slippery slope. I mean, that's where our culture lives now.
Yeah. And I love that you use the word empathy, because a lot of people, even in the education field, don't see a connection between empathy and technology. They actually see a disconnect. So it sounds like what you're saying, and I'm sure what all of you guys agree, is that, students can find empathy through games, through technology. That's just kind of how it is now. I wonder, Marion, can you give your thoughts, and then maybe Susan and Marcus?
Sure. I mean, in terms of what I've seen, I think there's some really good work going on out there, and best practices are definitely emerging when it comes to how to use technology to support SEL. I can go on about this all day, but I'll call out, I think, just a few things that I think kind of feed into everything else. And the first really gets to the heart of everything, when it comes to SEL, which is really that, technology can and should always be used, to motivate social experiences and connections. Things like short videos, audios, interactives, other types of digital tools can only do so much on their own. I mean, what they can do, when they're designed well and when they're used well, is offer, focused shared experiences that can really be like a nice segue to kind of small group work and class discussions. I also see technology as offering kind of multiple ways for students to participate and learn. In more traditional classrooms, teachers typically have to choose one activity format, right? And then all students kind of have to conform to that approach. But, as we know, students vary so much in terms of how they want to access information, how they want to participate, how they want to share their knowledge. And so, digital tools that make use of different media, can offer choice and allow for more self-directed learning. And I think this is important in all content areas, but it's especially important for social and emotional learning when, growth and skill development are such personal processes. And also, students come into the learning environment, they vary so much in terms of, experiences that they've had, and, that it just makes it's important for people to sort of have their own agency over their learning process. And people vary across one to another, and even from day to day. And so especially at the middle and high school level, I think that that's really important. And then just finally, on the teaching side of things, what I'm seeing is technology allowing teachers to kind of identify student strengths and identify needs, and to track learning and to make kind of informed decisions, based on data using technology in ways that aren't really feasible in traditional classrooms usually.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and maybe we can get to this later, that, SEL skills, being folded into the teachers themselves, because it's hard as a teacher to admit that you don't know something. And, accessing data through technology isn't something we're necessarily taught how to do in college or as educators. And so there's a lot of SEL skills that need to be deployed when you're an adult trying to, facilitate that. So, Susan, how have you seen technology used with respect to SEL skills?
Yeah, I think it adds. I think the best technology is one that uplifts the experiences and doesn't get in the way of it. And so, just to pull on a couple of the designs that we've used at iThrive, we have a role playing simulation, and that's delivered through technology, but it doesn't get in the way of the interaction. It's actually designed to foster interactions between students, whether they're live in person in the same space or on a conference call like we're all on right now. And so what we wanted to do with that work is, how can we create a space where students are really practicing their social emotional skills in a context that maybe is a little bit stressful, or where decisions need to be made, or where collaboration needs to happen, or where you're competing or debating different ideas. And so how do we design technology that fosters that sort of magic circle where you're stepping into that space, maybe assuming a different identity than your own, but engaging in a kind of role play where you're putting your own skills to the test and being able to reflect on, oh, I didn't do so great there. Let me try again. And so often with social emotional learning lessons and programs, it's very hypothetical. And so how do we really build and practice those skills? Almost like, how do we build our muscles? We go to the gym, we practice, we try harder, we get feedback. Creating that social emotional gym space where students can practice their skills, where adults can practice their skills, and see them playing out when the stress level is ramped up a little bit, but not in a way that feels harmful or everything's on the line. It's a game, so it's fun, it's engaging. But oh wow, I didn't handle stress well. What can I do differently next time? Right?
Yeah. There's not as much at stake, but you still get that sense of it, right? And I'm really eager to hear what you have to say, Marcus, especially when you add music into this, right? Because that seems to have its own element as a piece of technology. So in what ways have you seen technology used and leveraged?
Yeah, so first, I think the willingness to accept technology in the classroom has certainly increased because of the pandemic. We've seen that we really need to embrace that. So that's been able to bridge technology and SEL first. So, your platforms like Microsoft Teams and Google Classroom now have these new updates that kind of bring us all together so that you can have things like, self-awareness and optimism. The way that we do it with Make Music Count, it's so interesting. Sean had mentioned the importance of empathy, and I'm sure we can all relate that there isn't much empathy in math usually. You either get it or you don't. And that's really where the importance of the musical aspect comes in, where a student can say, I may not have gotten it this way, but now that I'm looking at my favorite song, it now allows me to understand in a personal way, to where we have in our sessions, kids can pick whatever song they'd like, and so that empathy is there to where I'm able to understand where you're struggling and understanding where you're able to be strong now because something's able to connect to you culturally. So I think it's been a movement that we have very much needed for a very long time, and I think it's going to stick with us now moving forward.
You've really queued me up for the next question, which is, where do you think it's going to be in 5 years? So much changes so quickly nowadays, and I think the pandemic has really helped us see that we need to kind of get with the times. And so I wonder if, Marcus, you can talk a little bit about where you think technology and SEL will be in 5 years, and maybe even where you want it to be in 5 years.
Yeah, I think that in 5 years, we will have curriculum that represents the students that are asked to learn that set curriculum, right? So being able to, and that makes all the difference. When you see yourself represented in what you're learning, you're now automatically engaged, and you're able to connect, and you know, it makes all the difference. And so at the very least, I think having a culturally relevant approach to teaching students is going to be how we need to move forward in the future. I also believe that, again, because of the pandemic, we're going to have a greater sense and understanding of how technology can be helpful, um, not just in the classroom, but at home, right? So making sure that students have Wi-Fi at home to be able to connect to class when they can't make it or when they're sick or something like that, right? Like these are all issues that we saw during the pandemic that we'd be wise to stick to as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. Marion, what are your thoughts? Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years with technology and SEL?
I mean, I feel like there's so much that we know from work in other content areas like science and math about how to use digital tools well to support teaching and learning generally. And so, among my hopes and expectations for the next 5 years is that SEL programming more often will take kind of those learnings into account. I mean, I already mentioned, before, some of the advantages of tech for SEL, that it can motivate, social interactions, it can give students more control, it can support teachers. These advantages of tech, have been identified across content areas and across learners of all ages. So I think that there's a lot that we can continue to learn from that and apply to our SEL work. I also think and hope that the teaching of SEL increasingly will draw from research in the learning sciences related to how social and emotional competencies actually develop. When you think about kids and adolescents and adults, they're different, and those differences across people of different ages, have implications for how they think about and how they build social and emotional skills. So, in designing and engaging students in SEL, I think it's important to take those developmental factors into account. And, well-designed digital tools can really help make that happen.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm just trying to pick on words that you use. So does the, design, and Marcus mentioned curriculum and science. I mean, it sounds like what we're saying is let's codify this, right? This isn't just something extra that we should be doing in schools. It should be part of everything. It should be part of the curriculum, part of the school day, part of the school week. And it'd be great if we could get there, in just a few years.
I'd say codify and localize, right?
Yeah.
No one approach works everywhere, but
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. Marcus, your thoughts on this? Or I mean, Sean, sorry, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's I hope, what your question was, where do you hope technology is going to get? I think there's a lot of conversation to be had here about, in schools and learners. And I think we're doing a lot of that work. More broadly, I think societally, I hope that we move a lot of the platforms where we're connecting and integrating into places of relationship building and empathy. A lot has been said in the last few years about just how divisive social media platforms and experiences have been. I'm a big gamer. I play a lot of games, and they're actually a really fantastic place to connect. There's, don't get me wrong, lots of toxicity in gamer culture as well. But that's changing as players become more and more diverse. And, and I think that there's been a lot of strides that have been taken in the gaming industry specifically to create more positive relationship experiences, just in real online communities. And by real, I mean mainstream. So I think that for me, my wish is that we collectively, societally, put our foot down around this and say, hey, you know what, we don't want this in our schools, and you know what, this isn't how we want to interact societally either. And there's a lot of room for dialogue and empathy making. We've talked a lot about empathy, but also just helping the people, kids' parents, societally have more wholesome interactions as well. So I feel like, my wish from the technology standpoint is that we yeah, outside of the sphere of education, take a harder stance on this and advocate for platforms being designed to build better social interactions. I think that there's also, SEL isn't just social interactions; it's also how you relate to yourself. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for that with VR. I just got an Oculus Quest 2 at Christmas, which is mainstream VR headset, and this blew my mind. Prepackaged in the headset as like a pre-installed app was this virtual reality experience, experiencing life from the perspective of somebody who's schizophrenic, paranoid.
Oh, wow.
And you're in this person and they're narrating and you're experiencing their experiences and then the disconnect that they have. And it was kind of an artistic experience, but I just gave me a lot of hope for the potential of understanding that is possible with these types of technologies now. And I was just amazed that it was pre-bundled. Like I couldn't,
Right.
it was right there alongside a Star Wars game, So I think there's a lot of opportunity, just mainstream to have. I think people are craving these types of technological experiences as well.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned gaming. I have a 14-year-old son, and during the pandemic, if he couldn't play video games, he wouldn't have been able to socialize. I mean, he really, and yes, he did rage, but again, it's a talking point for us as a family, right?
Learn how to manage his rage, right?
Exactly. So let's stop and let's talk about this, right?
Yeah.
Susan, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years, or where do you hope we'll be?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about where education was and workplace culture was 26 months ago. I mean, we had such a sea change because of with the support of technology. And so, I think about some of the largest crises right now facing our young people and our teachers. We know from the science of social emotional learning that if you are stressed, if you are depressed, you cannot learn. And so how are we really thinking about the mental health of our young people, of our educators, of our parents? And how can we think about using technology to support, to provide the resources educators need to be fully present in the classroom, to take away burdens that get in the way of full engagement, authentic presence, that really is about that connection between adults and students with themselves. How do we design technology that fully supports that? How do we think about communities and cultural institutions like museums and libraries as being partners in learning and educating our young people for social emotional learning, but also for history, for civics, for math, for English, for all of the subject areas? I have this sense that it's unreasonable, the demands we put on an educator in a single classroom with 6 hours a day and so many competing needs that each student has and each educator has. How do we leverage technology to support the critical, important work of educating our young people, to meet them where they are developmentally, give them the experiences that they need to thrive? Technology is a piece of that, but nothing's more important than human connection. And so how do we design with those endpoints in mind? So that's my hope for technology.
Yeah, I like your emphasis on like the idea of partnerships, right? We can't do it all alone and all by ourselves. And so and I think technology is a facilitator of that kind of environment that we want to have for ourselves, for our teachers, for our kids, everything like that, right? I want to ask another question and kind of start with you, Marcus. Where in your work do you find the greatest opportunity to sort of address inequity? And I wonder, like, this conversation about partnerships and empathy and humanity and technology seems to correlate with this idea, right? So like where in the work that you do you find the greatest opportunity to address inequity?
I think that during the pandemic, we really saw who had access to technology and who did not.
Right.
Oftentimes, even before the pandemic, I always felt that the schools and the school day was maybe about 3 to 5 years behind technology-wise what's happening outside of the school day. So, access to Chromebooks, access to, like I said before, Wi-Fi, access, even at school, Wi-Fi at school, not even just at home, and so oftentimes we create, so again, Make Music Count is a math app that's taught by learning how to play your favorite song on the piano. And I created it first for kids that looked like me, who oftentimes were disengaged from math lessons, but would be more engaged if they saw their favorite rap artist or pop artist. And so, the struggle of being able to create a solution for a minority group, but then realizing that they couldn't have the solution anyway because they didn't have the technology, really was a pain point for myself. And I was like, man, I can't even provide you with something that'll work, and it just really was an eye opener to the greater issue at hand, which is like, it's not even just math. It's about what resources do you have for innovative solutions, and so as we're talking about, where we would like, to see technology in SEL in the future, if we don't address the fact that, you have to have access to tech resources to then have the solutions that are coming down the pipeline, we're not going to get there. And so I think it's first, again, addressing, why is it that certain areas, like where's the bar for where everyone should start for technology resources in order to then move forward. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Marion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Great answer. I think in terms of creating, equitable conditions for learning, I think that's involved in any real effort around social and emotional learning. I mean, SEL is focused, on developing mindsets where all learners, are respected and feel validated, in their interests and identities and whatever experiences they bring to the table. But in terms of the how to, achieve equity, I think a lot of it is about ensuring equitable access to learning opportunities across multiple dimensions. On one hand, there's kind of the technical and more logistical dimensions of access, which involve, making sure resources are available to students using devices that they have, right? Making sure resources are in a language that learners understand, offering things like closed captioning or playback, pacing controls, or using a mix of media, having options like that really helps reduce kind of potential barriers to learning. So I think of those as kind of no-brainers when it comes to creating equitable learning opportunities. But then, I also think there's another dimension of access, which really involves creating equitable opportunities for learners to kind of connect deeply with the content and with the people who are involved in offering it. So, for example, can all learners, find voices and perspectives, that resonate with them, right? And this is a lot, but certainly it involves, involving a racially, culturally, demographically diverse group, throughout programming, right? In the creation of it, the implementation of it, the evaluations of it, and can all learners kind of connect with the substance of the learning experience, and be able to draw from their own experiences. Such as by seeing, urban or rural settings that look like their own, or seeing, customs or clothing that look like the ones that they have. I think these are the kinds of considerations that make SEL experiences kind of meaningful to learners, and sort of in that way kind of open the doors for them to learn from them.
And I don't know if I heard you right, but I thought you said like the access to the creators of the technology. I mean, that really resonates, because that's something growing up, like I never even thought about like who created this and why. And it never occurred to me as a child to be like, oh, let's think about like the person behind that. And it sounds like you're saying that that's a great opportunity for kids nowadays to look through that deep content and to see that another human who either looked like them or didn't look like them created it, right?
And participate in the creation of it.
Exactly. Sean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this real quick.
Yeah, I mean, Classcraft students have characters in Classcraft that represent them. So like, there's a very like we're going one step even further and saying, hey, this is you. And so we've really put a lot of energy into making characters that are as diverse as possible. And what's interesting from that perspective is just the opportunity. Some feedback we've gotten was like, hey, blown away that like not only are there brown avatars, but there's actually multiple variations of brown not just like you can be black in Classcraft, but there's like a lot of variations of blackness. So I think that there's the obligation when you're representing a student to go that extra step. Another piece that I'm like super interested in these days is a lot of disproportionality and inequity in schools comes around behavior intervention. If you look at boys, Black kids, students on IDA plans, the amount of disproportionality that there is in suspensions, referrals versus their actual behavior is really appalling. And so, a lot of what we get a lot of data, because what's happening in Classcraft is that the teachers are reinforcing specific behavioral expectations in real time. So I want you to be empathetic. I want you to name your emotions. I want you to manage, your emotions with strategies that you've learned in other places. But we're going to give kids high fives when they do that. And being able to take that data, early indicator data, right? Like, because the single biggest indicator of whether a child is going to have a future suspension is a previous suspension, AKA by the time they have a suspension, it's kind of too late. And so how can we catch them earlier? And also, how can we hold ourselves accountable by looking at that data and saying, hey, you know what? Like, Sean is actually getting a lot less high fives than a lot of other kids. Is that on him, or is that actually on us as teachers? We're not seeing him. We're not seeing the value. We're not seeing his efforts. And so when you build a game, because Classcraft is behavior management is a game, and when you build a game, hardwired into the concept of a game is equal opportunity. And like everybody is starts at level 1, and no matter who you are, you have the same ways of leveling up, progressing, etc. And so it's our responsibility to then help school leadership and teachers and everybody involved hold themselves accountable to actually living up to that promise. So I think the data is really critical, and is a huge opportunity for us to address inequity, and makes the tech especially relevant in this case.
It seems clear, gaming, its immediacy can help teachers with the data they need to be able to manage their classroom, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm wondering, and this question I think is for Susan, and Sean, feel free to step in if you want to, because I think this is relevant to your work. But how can games help teach social and emotional skills, right? We know that games can give us the data we need to understand what's happening. That seems clear. But how can it actually teach kids social and emotional skills, Susan?
Yeah, we use games in 2 different ways. We use both game design and games that are designed already. So from the game design perspective, I became really interested in how do you design a social emotional learning approach for teenagers, because the elementary and middle school versions of social emotional learning just can't just be aged up, because the teen brain is at a very different developmental stage, and we need to design with that in mind. And I was learning about game design as I was sort of tackling with this question. I was like, this is brilliant. Game design is social emotional learning. It's different modes of expression. You have to, when you're designing something, you have to make guesses about how the player will feel when they're playing your game, and then make tweaks based on that understanding of someone else's perspective and empathy. So that deep understanding of emotions and emotional awareness and perspective taking. I could talk about this for days, but it really made me realize, oh, this is an amazing approach to do social emotional learning with young people. And then what I quickly discovered was, oh, and it's also a really interesting way to identify and learn by listening, how young people are understanding the world. And so we use social emotional learning plus systems thinking as we unpack together, how does the world work? what are the rules in place in my classroom, in my school, in my home? What are the key mechanics and rules that govern how I feel in the space? Do I like how I feel? What could I tweak about the rules, the mechanics, the characters to change that? And so to sort of address the last question that was being asked as well, we've started using our game design studio approach to understand how are young people experiencing inequities in their classroom, in their neighborhoods, in society, and how can we use game design to change elements of those systems, to dismantle the inequities that they have lived experience, expertise in, understanding it as a game board, for example. I have one of their games up behind me, the Runaround. Understanding the game board of the juvenile justice system is one way that they were both understanding, how did it make me feel? Where's the inequity? How do I look at the data that creates that system and unpack that and understand where do I need to change it to make this a more just system, to make me feel better? So game design is one way that we do that. And then in that game that they've designed or other games that we designed, we invite players in to have really difficult conversations. But what the game does is it creates an openness, a playfulness, a readiness to have those deep, hard conversations. And then you have that, like Sean was talking about, the VR experiences, a taste of that empathy for a given experience creates all these opportunities to dig into self-awareness and understanding others and making difficult decisions. So there's so much richness both in design and in gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, it teaches kids how to move inside and outside different contexts, right? It's what we teach them to do as writers too, like who's your audience, what's happening, how can you respond to it? So we have time for one more question. We have three minutes, and and this is going to go to Marcus. I'll ask a question, then you can, so you know, Marcus, you have a deep understanding of teaching and learning content. I think, and Marion too, this can go to both of you. But Marcus first, you know, given this deep understanding you have of learning content, curriculum, pedagogy, in what ways did you sort of draw on all of this knowledge to build out your specific technology?
Spending time with the students. You know, before we were an app, we were an in-person after-school program, and we really built our curriculum based on student feedback. And you know, there isn't time for an actual example, but anyone can download Make Music Count for free onto their device to see how you can apply mathematics and learn how to play the piano, even if you haven't done before. One of the things that I really have loved about SEL is, and I think this relates to the last question about how you can teach this, is the connection to self-awareness and optimistic thinking. You know, the key to mathematics, in my opinion, is believing in yourself. You know, there's so much intimidation that mathematics just presents by just being math, to the point where students aren't even applying to themselves because they already don't think that they can do it. And so by incorporating, you know, your favorite song and learning how to, you know, applying that math skill to learning how to play an instrument, it creates so much confidence and optimism that, you know, I actually can be good at mathematics because I just applied algebra to being able to play, you know, the latest Beyonce song. And I have learned a new skill because of it. And so I really love those key aspects of SEL, the self-awareness and the optimism, because I think that that's really going to be able to take us all forward, is just the simple belief in yourself, you know. And I know this because I personally struggled with math once upon a time in school, and really was frustrated with how I was here to learn, but the connections weren't being made with the teacher and the instruction. I was like, I'm here, I'm a great student, but I'm not getting it. Can you find a way to connect the dots for me? And, you know, that's where music kind of comes in.
Yeah. And I wonder, Marion, if you can get the last word in here.
Sure.
You know,
quickly. I mean, Alex Vincity's program called I'm Sparked represents a really nice coming together of best practices for how to use technology to support SEL and best practices for, you know, using technology to support the teaching and learning of middle and high school students specifically. I'd love to, you know, talk more about that with anyone who wants to reach out. But, you know, the activities are brief, experiential, social, self-directed, reflective, And, for teachers, it's a really nice balance between offering, structure and also a ton of flexibility. I'll let you have the last word.
Oh, great. Thank you. Throw me the softball here. Well, I appreciate everything that you guys did and everything you do. Thank you so much. Please look or go to the agenda for everyone to navigate to the next session and choose your showcase of choice and press join.